Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Rev Up, where we talk all things revenue growth for business. If you are responsible for marketing, sales, account management, any of these things, or you own or run your own business and want to learn what it is working and what isn't working out there in the big bad world of revenue growth, and maybe you want to have a little fun along the way, you are in the right place. I'm Ben Shipley. I've spent the last 19 years of my life building and leading revenue teams all over the world. And the Rev Up is brought to you by Trust the Process, where we help small to medium-sized businesses grow by leveraging cost-effective, skilled staff offshore, particularly in the Philippines, and technologies like CRMs, things like brands like HubSpot or ActiveCampaign. Visit trusttheprocess.com.au if you would like to find out more or how we might be able to help. And today on the Rev Up, we have a special guest, Charmaine Keegan. I'm very excited for this one. Charmaine is a trainer, keynote speaker. She is also the director and founder of Smarter Selling. Smarter Selling actually provides like sales and leadership training, really for anyone who wants to drive high-performing teams. Charmaine's sales career spans over 30 years. She's trained over 8,000 sales professionals, really empowering them with the confidence to embrace selling with integrity and authority. This is something that Charmaine and I are very aligned on, really to help people deliver, like immediate revenue growth. Charmaine's, areas of interest and expertise, as well as selling, lie in human psychology. She's a certified trainer in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, hypnotherapy, timeline therapy, Myers-Briggs, situational leadership. She teaches extended DISC. She's also authored over 20 ebooks. She's a speaker. She's a sought-after panelist, contributor, etc. And actually, big congratulations. She's been chosen essentially to be the sales spokesperson for Salesforce for 2023 in this region. And so very excited to have Charmaine on the show today. Tune in. It's a great conversation. I hope you all enjoy. Welcome to the Rev Up, Charmaine Keegan.
Thanks very much, Ben. Pleasure to be here.
Whoa, crowd goes wild. Yeah, awesome to have you here. We've been connected for quite a while, a very, I suppose, digital relationship in that connected through LinkedIn. We're both pretty convinced that we might have known each other outside of that, but definitely through LinkedIn. I've been following what you do for a long time. We've obviously got quite a bit of alignment. Both, I would describe myself as a massive sales nerd. I don't know if you describe yourself the same way, but certainly a sales expert. And so I've been super excited to have you on the show and talk all things sales. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben. I'm excited about talking all things sales. Where do you think the alignment is, Ben? What's one of the alignments that you saw on LinkedIn that you felt was an alignment?
There's a few things. I think probably the main one for me is that you talk a bit about sales having changed and sales evolving. I think it's changing and evolving maybe even faster than it has in the past. How people buy now is changing, and so there's a lot of stuff that you talk about around the change in the way people need to approach selling. That's probably the main one. Yeah. I'm not used to being asked questions, to be honest.
I thought I'd just take you off guard. I just thought I'd just throw them out there to see how you'd handle it.
I love it. Love to be tested. That's good. I think there are actually some like common themes in our two stories. I know, you were exposed to sales at a pretty young age. So was I. Grew up in a household of essentially running a wholesaling business out of a house, traveling up and down the coast with my stepdad, going into surf shops and selling clothing and leg ropes and things like that. I'd love for you to share with our audience what your story's been, what your path's been into the world of sales, and kind of how you kind of got to where you are now.
Well, yeah, good question, Ben. That's an interesting story about your family, though. So a bit different. I grew up on a farm that didn't make any money, mind you.
Yeah.
in England, in Essex. And my mother was those days it was a housewife, and my father actually became quite ill. He died when I was quite young. He died when I was 16. He was a builder, but he became quite ill, so he was at home. We didn't have any money, but when you're very young, you don't know you haven't got any money, because the split between people that got money, not money, wasn't so obvious then. But as time went on, we were the people that were queuing up getting free dinner tickets, and it became quite obvious that we were, didn't have much of the mullah, as my son would say. So I thought, well, I'll just make money. So we were quite driven to make money. My dad was very driven to make money. They couldn't wear very much because he had lots of heart attacks, and he was a builder. But and he said, those days builders are not like they are in Sydney making money. They were poor. It was a poor thing. He left school about 13, I think he was when he left school. So I just did loads of jobs. I did about 9 jobs when I was at school, and just because I didn't have any time to spend it, I banked it. So I became quite good at banking it. But those jobs were about, they were all people contact jobs. So I learned really early on how to read people and how to understand people. Really, actually, that's not what I was thinking. I was just thinking, how can I serve them? Because I was in a shop, or I was wherever it was, and I just noticed that, when old Frank comes in, I'll change the music to classical because he likes that. And when his wife comes in, I clean a lot because she likes that. It was a little farm shop, those places would thrive then. And it sort of started there. Then I'm laughing because then I left school and I worked for a magazine. I left school at 15 actually, and I worked for a magazine my boyfriend started. He was from out of town, Ben. It's quite exciting. Boy from out of town. But he was actually 36, and I said this out loud. He was actually 36 and I was 19. He had 5 children, a whole nother story, very good over gin and tonic.
Wow.
And he actually even ended up in prison. But that's another whole, I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
He didn't, so that's where he went. But the side flip to that is he started this magazine, and I realized I understood selling because of that magazine, because he was quite animated, and he would go, and he was saying all these things about the shops, and it's like high street, like the high street, and he'd go, I didn't know what he was saying. And, we both know when you're stressed, you can't think straight. And I was trying to make notes, and I was all very embarrassed because I'd worked in the shop before and I couldn't keep up with what he was saying. And then he went to the office, and it's down to me to walk down this street. And I went in the first place he said to go in, and the guy was, with a different lens now, the guy was quite rude to me, but because I didn't have anything to measure it against, I just sort of started talking about a gas cylinder that they had there and how they were going to sell that, because I lived nearby and I had to drive 8 miles for my gas cylinder. And before you knew it, there was a half page drawn out, and I'd drawn it out as a free gas cylinder, as in free delivery. And they said, it's £120. And, I guess I should give you a receipt or something like that, and wrote it on a piece of paper. And I just walked out and thought, okay, that's, because what do reps do when that happens? You get confidence, right? I thought, that's what you do. And then I went in the next one. And the reason that's pivotal in my career is because when I got to their office, the 2 older guys, they were old, they were 36, but they seemed and they stood around me and said, don't worry, love, it's tough out there. Big thing about mindset for your listeners here. It's tough out there. No one's going to give us money. No one knows us. No one's going to pass over money. And I sort of heard a bit of this, but I couldn't understand because I'd taken $2,500 walking down the high street. And there's different reasons I remember that. One, because there was this bit of light that came on the table, and it's because my boyfriend had left the table to laugh in the corner, look at me plugged into the socket because he was laughing so much. But he said to me afterwards, I told you specifically, don't go in those shops. They threw me out. And I remember at that moment, Ben, that was the moment I went to him, I didn't know that. That was worth not knowing. And we talk about that a lot in sales, be careful what you write on the CRM, because your mindset's going to determine your outcome all the time. And so I didn't hear him properly because I was so stressed. So I went in every shop that he said, don't go in. And I went in with an open mind and no baggage and no belief. They're not going to say yes. They won't want it. Who's going to give us money? No one passed that baggage over to me. No one said, here, the new girl, open your head up. Here's the baggage. We think we're helping, right? Don't ring on a Friday. Don't do this. Don't do that. And so I then went to work for a local newspaper. And then I went to work on more media. So it was all media. And in those companies, I was just used to working hard, I was used to working hard and not necessarily smart at all then. Yeah. Quite the opposite. But, that was how my career got through. And then in those different jobs, I became a sales manager, which I shouldn't have been because I was rubbish at being a sales manager when I was 22, like horrific. Who'd make me a sales manager?
Yeah.
But my team, I'd train on selling. And so would always be the high performing team. And I'll just come in to get my coffee out each morning and go, haven't got the money, haven't got the time. My partner says it's too expensive. And I say these little things every morning. And I'd welcome them, all their things. Come on, got objections today. Great. Well, why would the client have an objection? Let's not think about overcoming the objection. The client's got a good reason. They've got the objection. What have we done before the meeting that lets them think that's an objection? What's the client? And sort of to welcome it and be kind about it and be partnering about it. Not trying to sell out and shove it down there in the old, show up and throw up. This was the 80s, 90s. Show up and throw up and spray and pray was in. And no one was thinking, let's partner and be a business partner. Let's understand. It was all like, get to the gatekeeper, go around them. So that whole thinking was very different, but luckily extremely successful. And so I ended up sort of getting a bit of a, in my 20s, 30s, a bit of known for that.
Yeah.
So I ended up training more and more people, but only on what I knew. So I wasn't a trainer. And I wasn't very good at it necessarily. Now, with looking back, I'm like, I'm not very good at it at all. But it's what people often do as managers. You teach your team what you know because it's got. So that sort of, that lifts me back to where I am now. And then I started my own thing. Basically, I worked somewhere and I was, doing extremely well. My budget when I come over from Australia was something like 4 million, and I took over 10 million. So I sort of knew what I was doing. And then I had a child 14 years ago, and I thought, I just do a little bit of this. But so many people say, come to me and help me with their sales and their systems. And are the sales down because the salespeople? Are the sales down because there's not enough leads? Or is there more, people just didn't understand what you do, which is analysing what your situation is so you can make really fundamental good choices. So everything's knee-jerk reaction, and it can happen like that in small businesses because we're wearing so many hats. We don't seem to have a lot of decision-making time. And so I did a lot of sales training, a lot of sales training that I knew, and then just rolled on to people that I didn't know, and then it became bigger than that. And, programs, other trainers, and, really me getting into mindset and training properly and really giving value.
Yeah. Do you think that early exposure to training people, right? And I'll frame this by saying, like, most people that get into sales management early in their careers, especially if they're really young when it happens, very rarely do they ever end up training anyone, right? Most of the time they end up with reports and numbers and these sorts of things. They get taught to manage people by telling them what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, rather than teaching them how to do things better. Do you think that your early exposure to training and teaching and that sort of stuff had any impact on what you kind of ultimately ended up doing? Like, did you get a taste for it, or was it?
Oh, yes. I remember writing down my 3 top jobs in the world, what they'd be when I was, 15 or 16 or 20 or something. And they were to be a sports teacher. This wasn't number 1, though. That was number 3. Number 1 was to be a highly paid actress that only worked outdoors. I couldn't stand being theatre. Number 2 was being a sales trainer, and number 3 was being a sports teacher.
Right.
They were the 3 things, because I don't think sales is hard. It's there's a process, there's a science, but people act differently and people just do weird things. And if as soon as they realize it's not about you as a salesperson, it's not about you ever, about you. And I recognized early on that you just got to observe people, and then if you observe people, you'll go, what that person cares about, what they don't care about. And all these things about reading buying signals, it's so obvious if you can just be present and truly care about the outcome, not just go in and sell at them, but really, truly care, then you naturally listen better and ask more inquisitive questions, and then observe what they're saying, how they're acting. And don't jump in when they're pausing, because you can see that they're pausing, you can see they're processing what you've just said, and they're thinking about it. Then I got into NLP quite big in my 20s, actually, and that became a game changer for me, because that's now about all that. That's all about how you think, behave, and communicate, what's being said, what's not being said, what's happening unconsciously. I followed this process. I turned up, I said these 5 things, but there's millions of ways of saying those 5 things. Did you read the signals? Like, it's not engineering, is it? It's not like this is E = MC². It's it's a science of having to observe constantly and pivot according to what's happening, just like you are now on the podcast. That's a science of human behavior. You're having to pivot on the spot. And I think once you realize that, and I realize not everyone got that. They had their same method. They got on the phone, their same method, and they sounded the same. They sounded, every call sounded the same. And I never understood, well, surely, even if the client needs the same thing, and even if we're selling one thing, those calls should never sound the same. Because every client's got different needs, wants, and beliefs, and thinking and baggage they're bringing, or questions they should never sound the same. So that just means you're not really present. You're just being reactive to a call and just, throwing up your features and benefits.
It's interesting that you say that, because I kind of agree, and I kind of have a different perspective on it. And I'd love to know if I'm just taking it the wrong way, or maybe there's an alternate way to look at it. I'm a massive believer in sales process, and I think that there is a sequence, there is an order that is the right order to do things in order to maximize good communication. Good communication is just understanding people's basic human psychology, their needs, their drivers, their wants, their etc. And so to me, there's a sequence that you should do things in. The questions that you ask, the types of questions you ask should actually mostly be the same, because you're taking them down a path, but how you interact and the specifics of the question should always be different. But where does that kind of cross over for you? How much of it should be the same because we're trying to achieve a certain result and there's a process and a sequence, and how much of it should just be?
Wow, what a good thing. Have you had arguments yet on any previous podcasts? Have you?
I don't think so.
Look,
I don't think so, but I'm looking forward to one.
No, you're ready for it, aren't you? I think that's a really good question. And I think it depends. It depends on many things. I totally believe there's a science, and I believe there's a journey, and we teach the journey. But what I'm trying to get to is sometimes people are obsessed, because I have more and more introverts coming to me now, and more engineers, and they're obsessed with the journey and not the reading of what's happening, and not the pivot as it goes. So I've come in prepared. I'm ready with these 8 questions. I'm getting there to get those 8 questions, because now they're talking about something else. And so I've still got my preparation, but the clients clearly had 2 people after me 2 weeks ago. They're interested in something else, and I need to now steer where I'm going to understand and let them talk more and adapt what I need to ask, because now the situation, the playing field has changed, because with more knowledge that they've got, that they're further along that chain, or they're going in a slightly different direction. So to me, people quite like having a science. It means you know where you are, but sometimes it can be, as long as we're training them, in my mind, to also just have full awareness. My questions are probably similar, but if I list the last 15, probably the opening 2 or 3 might be, but then after that, they'd go, there'd be whatever felt right at the time. But if you looked at me, probably go, out of these 25 questions, you must always ask these 15, like you would as well. But I think for sales leaders and for sales people and just entrepreneurs in general, just because to me, people don't have a problem with asking the same questions, Ben. They have a problem with adapting to different questions. They have no problem asking the same questions. They could do that, but they're not reading the signals and adapting and going, you know what? That question I asked at 9 o'clock does not suit this person who looks at the same situation. This does not suit this person at 9:10, because they've clearly had something wrong this morning's happened to them. They've clearly not trusted something before. A lot of stuff has happened. And with that, I'm going to completely change my approach and get them talking more than I was going to before, and do this and do this and do this. And just that pivoting, constantly observing and adapting, I find is lacking. And so I do believe in a science. I do believe in a process. Believe that's what we train. But like another layer on that is, are you aware? Are you watching what's going on? Because maybe, what your plan needs to evolve or change or adapt, or maybe not be right for today, that question. Yeah.
I'm totally with you. I actually, after talking about it more, I actually totally agree with you. And so I apologize for being so agreeable. I've been a big proponent of like call listening for years and years. I think it's like the number one tool for a sales manager, especially if you're like inside sales, you have to have the ability to listen to calls, and people should listen to their own calls. And the most frequent thing that I've found impactful in call coaching is when somebody notices that the customer said something that was really an opportunity and they breezed past it because they weren't really listening. That to me is usually like one of the most important learnings for people in call coaching situations, because the reason why I agree with you is because you could have the perfect process, but if you're not listening to them, none of it will matter. If you're not true, exactly as you said, if you're not truly present, if you're not truly paying attention to why they're saying what they're saying or why they're asking what they're asking, you can have the perfect process and you'll never get to where you need to get to. But at the same time, it is important to have a process because, and I would adapt this on from a person-to-person perspective, and I'd love to know if it's the same for you. Like, there's some people that when I onboard them as salespeople and I'm training them, I will not give them a script, right? There's some people I will fully give them a word-for-word script for them to learn because they need the process and they need the structure. And once they internalize it, they can stop thinking about it and they can be present. There's other people that if you give them a script, they'll get so obsessed with it that all they'll be trying to do is say the next thing in the script. And so like, it does depend on the person. But you kind of need those both, right? If the process is going to get in the way of being present, you've got to figure out a way to get around that.
I mean, all this comes back to coaching, isn't it? And how they're on board on your company and how they're coached at the very beginning. And what's your ethos around selling? But our big ethos is that observe and adapt. And the other one is reflection, which you've just said, when somebody listens to their own calls, you're doing call coaching and they themselves say, oh, I missed an opportunity. Our big thing is it's our number 2 lesson, after observe and adapt. After every call you do, after every meeting you do you just think for a moment, if I was to do that again, what would I do differently? Do you have the ability to reflect back and heighten your emotional intelligence and go, you know what, I just talked over them and they said this thing and I didn't got some noise happening here, I'm so sorry. And they've said this thing, but I didn't really listen to what they were saying, or I just talked more than them, or I didn't listen fully, or I didn't I've missed all these signals. And if people do that, observe and adapt after every call. I do it after every call. I do it during the whole training session. Every gap we have, the first thing I write down is how I'd improve that section every single time. What my failures were, where I fell from grace, where I might be a bit embarrassed or my ego was a bit bruised, or where I went too fast, or anything. With the group, I'd got 2 people that really got it, but 2 people didn't quite get it, that I could have done a slightly different exercise with them, and just constantly reevaluating how could I make this better next time. And every call after this, I'd be thinking, how could I, that was to happen again, and Ben called me, what could I have to make that, to improve that, so that people listening in would have a better experience or clearer. So I think to me, I think it's clever that you do a lot of call coaching, and I believe, and I agree with you with scripts. So we're quite I'm like you. I'm very careful with scripts, and I'll only give them to people for them to understand the purpose of them.
Yeah.
And I say to them, this is infrastructure, so learn it inside out, and then it becomes yours and you own it. And then you no longer have to think about it, because if you're thinking about what you're saying, you're not present. And every time you think what you're saying, you're not present with the client, you're just missing opportunities, but also the client can feel that you're not present. They can feel that you're not there with them because you're not, the way you're answering doesn't make any sense, because what you should be doing is asking questions and investigating. And if you're investigating their answer, and you need to be listening to what they're saying. So we do like what we call frameworks around that. So I think it's clever that you do that. I think it's very clever for salespeople, particularly if they're doing lots of calls a day. To me, they need something to keep them on guide, but then hopefully they'll just learn it by rote, and they'll just own it and have what we call knowingness, which is to the point that you can just walk down the street and say it out loud. So if we've got a new person starting tomorrow, and he will have he will listen to 2 weeks of recordings before he's even anywhere near the phone. And there'll be me going through different processes and basically starting with the client in mind, why they're calling and what's going up. And he will listen to about 30 of those. Some of them are recorded and some of them me saying, this is what happened. This is what the client had. And it's important, right, Ben, because you may have been in these companies, and what happens on the first day of life is they drag them around finance and they lift their head open and go, this is finance, this is marketing. The poor person doesn't know what the toilet is and they have no idea what they sell. And that's why we've got this situation now. I don't know if you come across it. Well, I've been in places where a call comes in, they're like, oh, it's getting in the way of their job.
Yeah.
That's because for the first 3 weeks of onboarding, it was all the back end. It wasn't, this is the pain we're solving. This is a client we've had for 19 years. This is a client we've had for 6 months. This is what they went through. This is the pain it's caused them. These are the options they used before. This is why they reached out to us. This is the order and sequence that we took over the last 5 years to get into that client. We saw them at an event. We did this. We sent them a birthday card. We did this thing on LinkedIn. We sent them something of value. We did. All those touch points, the result of that is the sale. People often in these meetings, and you must have this, they're always about, what the sale is. It's like the managers have an opportunity here to say, how did it happen?
Yeah.
Rep can go, well, actually, this started about 2 years ago. So every other rep goes, the sale is the consequence of doing all the right behaviors. That happened because of all these right things that happened in this right order that then happened to be that because everything was laid out, the client said yes. It's not because you just had good luck. Sometimes it's good luck, but your luck improves and make more calls to the right people at the right time with the right message, right? And listen more than speak. But I think I'm looking around your call thing here because I've got a lot on my mind about call scripts, but I hear what you're saying and I agree. We're still not arguing, but I agree.
We'll find one yet.
I never
you know what?
Not.
You said something before that I got to be honest with you. I'm immediately, when we finish this, going to steal it from you and include it in some of my training. You talked about what I perceive as basically teaching someone how to learn sales, right? And I don't think I've heard anyone talk about that, to be honest.
They just push them in, give them a phone.
Yeah. In a different context, there's an author I love, Jim Quick, who's like a memory expert, works with like actors and things like that, teaches them how to unlock the power of their mind. And he talks all the time about the greatest superpower you can have is the ability to learn at a faster rate and deeper, right? If you can learn how to learn, then you've actually increased your capacity to learn and the speed at which you learn. And I think what you're talking about there is like how to arm people with the ability to learn how to do sales faster.
Yes.
I've never even thought about it that way before. Like, how do we teach them how to learn how to do this first?
I can tell you right now how we can teach them.
Yeah.
Metacognition, get them to think what they're thinking about. What are you thinking about? Are you thinking about selling at a client, or are you thinking about helping your client? Because every behavior and action you have comes from how you think. So our big thing is, what are you thinking about? When you wake up in the morning, what are you thinking about? When you go to the office, what are you thinking about? All your processes and all, are you going, oh, thank goodness, Ben's put this process in front of us. Brilliant. There's effective. Now I'm effective. Now I'm efficient. Or are you begrudgingly dragging yourself in because you're like, oh, are you seeing it as liberating because that gives you more time to make calls and have more client contact? Or are you just choosing to see it as restriction or something like that? What are you thinking about? What are you thinking about?
Yeah.
Thinking about what you're thinking about.
That's I would very much love for us to delve into this mindset aspect. Something that that I got taught really early on in my career, and I've seen it work in a lot of places since, is it's really important for marketing teams, sales teams, service delivery teams to actually have positively framed ways to talk about what they do and how they achieve, the company. Lots of companies have vision, mission, and values, and it means absolutely nothing. But positively framed ways to talk about how they're achieving the mission of the business And so an example of this is until 7 or 8 months ago, I worked for a company called The Entourage, right? And at The Entourage, there was no talk of we just did a deal or we made a sale, right? The purpose was to change the lives of entrepreneurs and help them build the business of their dreams, right? Empower them. And so when somebody joined The Entourage, we called it changing a life, right? Just changed a life. And that's, some people might not find that particularly enjoyable. Some people would find that a little bit cringeworthy. To me, it's a really positive way to think about what we're trying to do for people. We're not trying to sell them something. We're trying to figure out how we can help them. And is that kind of what you're talking about in terms of
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So there's a lot of things to mindset, and we could have a 20-hour podcast. I'm still willing to scratch the surface of what I have to say. But my first thing is this. The Entourage had that, and I think that's very clever. But what leaders can do, what salespeople can do, is stop thinking they're selling at people, just full stop. So you had this change in life thing, and you may think someone might think that cringy, but other people have got, like, I don't know, a widget that helps your pipes get cleaner, whatever it is. It's still back to, I'm helping somebody. They happen to have a pain point or an issue, or not even know they've got it, not even know there's a simpler way. And my job as a consultant is to understand them better and then solve it. It's not complicated, is it, Ben? That's all my job is to have more conversations with the right people at the right time, the right message, and listen more than talk, but to business partner with them. So I have still got one client that rings a bell when they get a sale, and I literally, there's a lot of lip biting that happens, because to me, that's all about, I've sold at. And even the word competition, the competition, like I'm in the ditches. Oh, forget about you, the client. I just want to win. Even those words to me are old school. You talk about the 80. I know you're big into how sales has changed. To me, one big thing is language that you've just mentioned. I want to talk about language for a little bit, if that's okay. But the word competition, we immediately take that out of clients and just go, when you speak to the client, just go, oh, there's other alternatives. And when they want to talk about them, you're happy for them to talk about them, because you're supposed to be above everybody else. You're supposed to be the authority in your field, the subject matter expert, this trusted advisor. If they have any inkling that you're a little bit defensive, it's over. Because if you really rate yourself, you've got self-worth, and you'll know the value of your solution, you won't be in the ditch against the other competitors. You'll go, oh, looks like you might have had Jeff in here. Fantastic. What do you have to say? What do you think of that? And you'll have better conversations and go, that's a good point, because you're supposed to be partnering with the client, not trying to shove what you want down their throat. And that's the big turnaround in 30 years. There's some people out there still thinking I'm out to sell out. And it's because the leaders often have come from that. And so we've evolved, but we're still doing the same thing, as opposed to going, I'm sure there's a more sophisticated, intelligent approach now, where I could be a business partner and all my team could feel good about themselves, and they could feel good about themselves, look themselves in the mirror each time they clean their teeth, and just think, I help more people today. And our banner, as we come in, it's got, who do we help today?
I love that.
Because managers, they probably say to you, I want my team to make more calls. And I say straight away, how would you talk about the problems you're solving? They go, we talk about the leaderboard. Go, no, not the leaderboard, not internal, not pipelines. No. How often do you, in your daily stand-ups or in your weekly meetings, talk about the problems that you're solving? So I said, do you want your team to be intrinsically motivated? Just talk about the problems you've solved. And when they go, oh, we've got another, and we do it here, everyone we go, right, remember those two guys that came last week that said they got really nervous about that? They've made 7 phone calls. They've made 20 grand extra. That's what they've done. We're all like, oh, great. Everyone's on the phone like a mad person, because they want to help more people. And like the Entourage, just the same. It's like, whatever it is, whatever your business is, you're helping somebody. And if we could just turn that whole thing around from being selling at and trying to get my figures and ring a bell or whatever, goodness, to I'm partnering with and I'm helping, that means old language, add-ons, upsell, cross-sell. I don't like to use it either. Like, somebody comes to you, they want to have something from you, Ben. They're chatting to you. If you don't offer the other services, offshore people, like, things like that, if you don't offer that and they need it, you're doing them a disservice, right? You have an obligation to do that. In my mind, it's not any upsell or cross-sell. When I'm Ben, it's like, oh, Ben, you've really helped them. Because if you didn't, they'll go somewhere else. They're going to spend a lot more time in pain. You've just helped them solve a problem. They might not know they've had that problem. And I think once all people realise that's all we're here to do, and if they've come to you for almost like one pen, but you've asked the right questions and you've understood their situation way more than even you had scripted, then you go, you know what, actually, we do sell whiteboards now. No, those other pens work really well. And I think the formulas changed from 6 years ago, and suddenly you got a 90 grand sale and they only come to you for a couple of pens. It's not because you were, oh, let's put the person on a leaderboard. I mean, I found the leaderboard stuff all embarrassing. I was thinking, we're just helping people. If the client walked in, what would you think? What would you think as a client? What an awful situation. Like, that's 270s, that's 1980s. Like, you want a client to come in and see people really intelligent, go, oh, hello, Mrs. Smith, how are you? And have polite, sophisticated conversations about the situation they're currently in, how they find the marketplace, what's happened to their business, what's affected their business, what can you possibly do and adapt to help their business? You know, what products and services you're not yet selling, which you probably should be because they need it. Like, we've got to get out of the trenches in the gotta win this, and just rise up and be this, you know, be a consultant, and just love being at a barbecue with you, Ben, and saying to somebody, yeah, I'm a salesperson, and own it and love it.
So I've been wrestling with something around the job titles in sales, and even like calling it sales for a little while, because sometimes just in the greater, you know, public mindset, it's impossible for someone like me or you to ever overcome how people feel about a certain thing, a certain word. And so for years now, I've not called my salespeople. And I spent years before that always being the one who was like, stop being embarrassed of it being sales. I had a team years ago that weren't called salespeople, and I made them change their roles to be called salespeople. But I flipped that maybe 4 or 5 years ago and stopped calling them salespeople because I wanted them to stop acting like salespeople, right? And I wonder whether what the greater public perceive salespeople to be plays a part in how people feel about sales, and therefore how they act about it, and therefore their mindset to doing sales, and whether it would be better to just stop talking about sales and call it something else, try and use different language for it, and whether that would maybe solve some of the problems.
So I think, well, it's on my mind. I think it's clever to change the word so the rep feels they may be a business partner, for example, or a consultant. However, there's a large however. If that rep thinks you're changing the word to get away from the word sales, we're indicating that sales is a sticky bad thing, which is what they're doing is a sticky bad thing. So I think I spent a lot of my time in programs going, all the badness say sales is helping. You're helping people, right? If I have this situation, you know, and I ring you up and you don't ask those questions, are you helping me or not helping me? And some of it takes ages to go, I get it, I'm helping you. And so, yeah, I'm a one-woman mission for everyone like you were to change how they feel about sales. But in the absence of that, I don't mind reps going, I'm a business partner or I'm a consultant. I think that's great, as long as they didn't realize. The downside with that is they may not be commercially minded. And so what they do is have lots of lovely conversations. If you do the disc scale, they're high eyes, which means that people, but they've got no commercial smarts. And in fact, they end up pushing the sale away. We talk a lot about pushing the sale away, how reps actually, they'll be mortified. But if I give you a story, they'll go, oh yeah, that's me. They push the sale away because they don't be too salesy. And high eyes are also people that go, they overshare and they go, oh, actually, our product breaks here and it does that, because they think that's going to build trust. Oh, that build trust, because then the client will trust me. Because if I can knock this thing of what I sell, and I can knock that thing, then they'll know the other stuff. It's not how you build trust. So, and this all comes down to psychology of how do people think about what they do? And if they see themselves as a consultant and they are happy being commercially minded, they are happy being in business. We do with a lot of for-purpose organizations. A lot of it is psychology. Me actually saying to one not very long ago, if you didn't do that, does that help that child get what they need? And they went, no, because they probably didn't know it's available. Right. So you haven't got the mother up against a wall with a gun against their head to buy it. But the lack of you assuming they haven't got the money means you haven't even mentioned it, which means who are you doing a disservice to? And she was like, them. So why are you not mentioning it? Because it's too salesy. And this whole tagging has got to go. Has got to go. Because it's like saying, you've got to buy this. When you go, oh, Janice, you've mentioned that Jimmy does X, Y, and Z. Just heads up, we have X, Y, and Z. I mean, there's nothing salesy about that. That is Janice going, thank goodness for that. You're amazing because you've just helped her. And you've asked her questions about things she didn't even know was a thing. She didn't even know these things were available because 4 years ago, these things weren't available and now they are. And so as a consultant, you have an obligation to be engrossed in that client, so engrossed that you're just helping them, you're partnering with them, whether it's B2C or B2B, it doesn't really matter. But the idea is the moment we start changing job titles, we don't want the sales reps to think selling's bad. And sometimes that
have you seen it go the other way too, though? I've seen this so many times where actually the person's they're not actual. This is not in all cases. There's certainly lots of people who are like, I don't want to be salesy. But I see it flip the other side too, where it's like, they'll say things like, I don't want to be salesy. But what they actually don't want is to have to say anything or ask anything that makes them personally feel uncomfortable. And so on the flip side of it, they don't want to tell them about the strength potentially of the terms that they're agreeing to. And so it hurts them on both sides. They haven't done the thing that helps the person make a decision to buy from you. And my former boss, Jack Delosa, used to say, if you don't sell to them, you can't help them. And on the flip side of it, they also don't want to tell them about the potentially bad things, right? Like it's a minimum of this amount of time for commitment. They don't want to be really clear about those things because they're not afraid of being salesy. They're afraid of saying things that the other person might not like and they might have to defend. And they're uncomfortable. They don't want to be uncomfortable. And I think that's a problem for all businesses. You see that so often.
But that's from later. You're spot on, and it's top down. It's always top down. So if you've got a leader that really feels that you're helping people and a great consultant and they've got good processes and everything else, then the reps feel that they're helping. But if you've got a leader, I mean, I go to some meetings, the leader goes, look, I don't want them to be too salesy. I go, lacking in money, are we? They go, oh, a little bit. I go, maybe you should change that whole thinking about them being too salesy. Like, let's just go back to core basics here. That they're making less calls because they feel they're too salesy. They're not having decent conversations. They're not asking decent questions, and they're not putting forward everything because they think it's too salesy. That doesn't help at the top that you think is too salesy. So, I mean, saying that alone is not enough to help a leader. They need to go and, we go through a whole psychological questioning to help them go, oh my goodness, I get it. I'm just helping people. It's the leader that needs to be trained. It's the driver of the bus. They're the ones that everyone's following from the top. The same thing with the language. You mentioned language earlier. Like we spend a lot of time on language. We have people all the time that go, what we are, Charmaine, we're a bit pricey, a bit expensive. And I always go, that should never come out of your mouth. They go, I tell our reps not to say it. I go, no. Not about saying it. You think it. You think it. Because if you think it, you may not say it to a client, but everything about you is saying it to a client. Everything about you, how you act and behave, to the point, I bet your reps go, I know it's a bit pricey. And if I listen to your calls, about 8 your reps just went, I know it's a bit expensive, but like no one should think it's expensive. You should think they should all be trained to know what the value is. So they go, God, is that all it is? $15? I get it. Wow, should be more. So once they say that, they don't think of the word expensive. They go, good value. It's really good value. And they mean two totally different things, expensive and good value. So a lot of our training that we do, we train teams, but we also train leaders on how to think differently about their team and about development, but also how to think differently about how they feel about just clients. I mean, none of this difficult client business. I go straight in. There's no such thing. They communicate differently to your team. How dare your team ever think there's a difficult client? They're a client. They're giving you money. Let's change that too. There's a client that we're not at the moment adapted enough to communicate effectively with. What can we learn from this? Rather than be all sore by it, let's choose wisdom. Let's choose to learn from this situation. Clearly, it's touched a few. I've allowed it to touch a few pointers on me. I've allowed to be effective. I'm in choice. I decide of how I react. Something's happened there where I felt that whatever reason I got a little bit defensive. Now I've called it a difficult, and start to label it like that. So people start to go, of course, there's no such thing as customer. I mean, there's things that have to.
But isn't there? Are you sure
Everybody
about that?
here is going to go there. Is no. They're just people that are in different states of mind, and they've got frustrated Ben because the last two places they called up to sort them out said they'd call them back and they didn't, and then one of your people that you've trained has turned up and they've put them in the same box, and they're just tired and exhausted. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying people should ever be rude, but what I mean is we've got to have more empathy that not everyone is in the same state to talk to us all day. And to empathise with whatever's going on with them. And, I mean, I'd say I'm quite a polite person, but the other day I ring up a place, I reckon I was on hold 8 times in a day. I'm telling you now, Ben, by the time I spoke to that 8th person, I wasn't the calm person I was when I spoke to the first person. Am I done as a difficult customer? I was just frustrated. I was intolerant. I was annoyed. I was polite, but it was through gritted teeth and they could hear it. But it's like, that's what people are hearing. Then they go, that's a difficult customer. I wouldn't say I was difficult at all. I say I'm quite an easy customer. But in fact, I was trying to give them my money, but I couldn't find the person. So let's just have some humanity and kindness about it.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Sales is just communicating. And we only call it sales because sales is helping, but we only call it sales because there's money. If there was no money.
I agree with that point, right? I agree with the point that we need to be compassionate and have empathy and all of those things. I've personally experienced being very patient, really trying to work with a client, and they're just a difficult client and they're taking up massive amounts of delivery time and service time and all of these things to a point that they're taking away from our ability to deliver to our other clients. Some of the best decisions I've ever made in my career were firing customers.
Yeah, let them go. Yeah.
Yeah, but you be honest with it. You set your parameters, and if they can't agree to them and they can't follow through on them, and they can't see that you're following through on your side, and they're not hearing what you're saying and it's not aligned.
Yeah. It's a mismatch. It's fine. But I think if it isn't a mismatch, then something's happened on that journey, because at some point they were a client. So at some point things were aligned. And then something, and I was thinking, as the salesperson, we're in charge of both sides of communication. We can't say I told the client A, B, and C. Like, even if we put it in an email to them, or it's just like
what did they hear?
Both sides. Yeah, we have to make sure they've heard it correctly. They won't just listen to the last thing that Ben said to them and actually processing that because it's a new bit of language they hadn't heard before. And then you've said 3 other things since then, but you haven't recognized because you were looking at something or writing your notes that they didn't really pick it up. So they're nodding, you're thinking they've heard, they think they've heard, no one's heard. And then what happens is, of course, people just read what they want to read from then on. They just hear what they want to hear from then on. And then suddenly you've just got mismatches. But I'm going to hold by my ground. There's no such thing as difficult customers. I'll hold it. I might message you one day on LinkedIn if it happens. I've got customers that we don't align with anymore, for whatever reason. But And when I hear calls, people say this is a difficult customer. I think the thing is, Ben, if people put on the CRM, because people do, this person's difficult. It's back to my old boyfriend, right? That people could go in with already with aggression to that call because they've got that note. And so I'm really big on having people take notes on the CRM. I'm really big with them thinking about it. And if things haven't gelled that day, you just put, it didn't gel today for me. And, if I read other people's notes, I actually say out loud, that's what they thought of that client on that day. That bears no resemblance to what actually happened. If the client said they don't want this and I don't want that bears no resemblance to what the client said. That's what the rep took from that meeting. The rep may have completely misheard and misunderstood. And then secondly, if they didn't mishear and understand, the next day the client might change their mind. More education suddenly wants A and B. So these notes have to be very careful to the way they're written and the way they're interpreted.
There's a great quote who I have no clue who said it. So you might know, which is there's always 3 versions of the truth. There's my version, your version, and the truth. But we're both probably wrong.
Yeah, even the truth is
subjective. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm completely into all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I reckon one of the books I read that changed my perspective on like truth and what I know is a really cool book called Remember by an author named Lisa Genova. She's written books about Parkinson's disease and a bunch of other things. I actually got challenged a couple of years ago to read more books by female authors. A friend of mine was like, "What have you read recently?" I told them all the things, and they were like, "How many of them have been written by female authors?" I was like, 0. And so I just randomly went into a bookstore and bought this book by Lisa Genova. But most of the book is about like how memory works. And I tell you what, you read that book, you'll get to the end of it, and someone will argue something with you, and you'll just sit there and go, "We're both wrong."
Yeah.
We're almost certainly both wrong.
Is it your favorite book?
Is it my favorite book? No.
What's your favorite book?
Oh, that is a very tough question. There's a lot of different categories. Like the most impactful for me was the first ever like personal development book I read. My dad gave me a copy of How to Win Friends and Influence People. He gave it to me when I was 16. I don't think I read it until I was 19 or something like that. I'd say my favorite book, because it encapsulates so many like fundamental beliefs in my life, is actually the Count of Monte Cristo. And actually not even the whole book, because the whole book ultimately is about like being patient to take really intense revenge, right? Which is not what I believe. But there's this amazing section really early on where the main character essentially finds his first and most important like mentor. They're both imprisoned, right? And it's they're both imprisoned, and he just finds this guy who happens to just know all of this stuff, and so he just learns from him. And it's just been a common theme in my life. I've been very lucky to be able to find these mentors as I've gone along, just at this perfect moment in my life where they've taught me things that I really needed to know. So there's just a lot of parallels that really hit home for me. And I actually only recently read it. So it's one of my favorite books. I only actually recently read it, an absolute classic. Yeah. What about you? Do you have a favorite book?
I do. I have, I love How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I think although lots has changed in selling, some core fundamentals are the same.
Yeah.
I am big on epigenetics, quantum mechanics, metaphysics, and neuroscience. So I follow a guy called Dr. Joe Dispenza.
Right. I want to ask you about this, just one other thing in relation to learning. Do you have an approach for your own learning? Like, as somebody that teaches other people how to do stuff, do you have a way that works best for you?
Do I have a way that I learn? Oh, great question. I do. What's your way of learning?
My way of learning is I used to be intensely kinesthetic. Like, I used to just have to try things and figure them out for myself. And that has changed a lot over the years. I learn a lot through reading, and I learn a lot through listening now. Audiobooks and physical books are probably my primary source of information. But then I still, probably like everyone to a degree, I still have to go and do things. The real lesson behind the information doesn't usually land for me until I've had a couple of goes of doing it myself. So the sort of kinesthetic base still exists within me, where I don't truly understand it until I've tried to do it. But that's my style.
So that's interesting, and it makes sense you have to try it a few times, because it's not in context when you learn it. When you learn something, you have to put it in context to learn it properly. So I'm big on how people learn. Like, I spend a lot of time watching how other trainers train and how people do things. If I go to an event, I have 3 notepads, like they're in my head, because I don't always physically take 3 notepads. So my notepad's broken up into 3. One is me learning as a student. And then one is me seeing how they're training and how they're running the room. And like just to do with music and lighting and breaks and how they delivered something and how they landed it and how they got you to lean in or think or intrigue or how they run it. And then the last one is the commercial side of what they've done. There's 20 people here. There's 7 little squares. There's this. They channel you through. They pretend you're a VIP. There's 15% that are VIP. That's not too many. That's not too. So there's that sort of commercialization of it. So I turn up to those and do that. But I also, my way of learning is, I've learned a lot recently, actually, about learning, and it makes sense. So when you're learning, if you ever get to, that's what I'm watching all the time, is watching new thoughts happen, and learning is thinking something different. You're literally changing your mind. So when you see under a microscope, like your synaptic gaps, like your neurons here, they actually break if you change your mind. So you go to work the same way every day, and then somebody comes along, Ben, and says, hey, why don't you go this way? And so that's quite thick, that, because you've gone the same way most days, and now you've got to go, and that actually breaks, and it starts to be, you start to have confusion, and you sort of go, well, why would I do that? And then, okay, I get that, now why would I do that? And then the moment it gets to another one, you go, I get it. And that's the light bulb moment, because now it's sealed. And the thing is about learning, the more times you rerun that, the more times, neurons that fire together, wire together. The more times you do, that's where that whole sentence came from by scientists, by the way. And that gets thicker and thicker. That becomes more of them. That becomes synaptic gap and like neural nets, and on it goes, right? And they get connected. But the reality is you need to keep repeating it. And so the reason I've done an online program is because we have these amazing face-to-face things, and I learn a lot from them, and people come in and they it's very practical. They have to think a lot. They have to think a lot and do a lot, and they look different, they too. They just act and behave different. They know the benchmark of a professional sales leader or a professional salesperson or whatever it might be, customer service person. Normally it's sales and leaders. And then what happens is, what do you do then? Bye-bye, see ya, ta-da, out the door. What is the leader doing, with that team? So we've created this academy, because actually I'm a director of another business online, so I've had all my learnings from that, so that people actually have something every week to go into as a group. And every group we've got on, they spend 20 minutes a week. Some groups spend a little bit less than that, actually, that's a smaller group. And then what they do is they all on Zoom or in the office just look at something on the academy, but frankly, it could be anywhere. It doesn't matter where it is. And it could be a podcast, it could be a video, it could be the whole course, it could be three lots of 2-minute videos, it could be an ebook or a guide or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, and it doesn't have to be my material. But the point is, it's a collective of realizing that learning is important, that it's an evolution of our skill set, that it's the culture and the fabric of that business. It's not just, we've ticked that box, we've gone off to a sales training company for 2 days, which breaks my heart, and you come back and there's your book debt. Like, not that happens very much anymore. I'd say it happens very little. But what can you do to keep people sharp and polished and on edge, and reignite their love of learning? Like, I've had groups seeing where people go, you know what, I wasn't looking forward to today, and I can't believe it's 5:30. Where's the day gone to? And then the next day, there they are, Ben, over that product table, downloading QR codes and picking up little booklets. And I thought, well, who would have thought 8 o'clock yesterday morning had their breakfast, that they'd even walk over to that? They were like, oh, not for me. I hated school, or I didn't like that, or da-da-da. There they are. God, that was all interesting. I learned how to understand my wife better. You're saving marriages here, they're saying, because they've learned to communicate better. So suddenly it's like, oh, this is just communication skills. The light bulb's gone off. And I'm like, maybe I will grab that 10 best questions to ask, or that, that little booklet on 40 best objections, or 6 ways not to negotiate too much. Or I've got a whole load of them, like 18 of them there, and they're all free. And so suddenly they're all over there, because, and then they're on the academy afterwards, because it's learning. And we give the directors a lot of training on the academy. In other words, you're not saying to them, everyone go off this week and do the three blogs and objections. No. You get each individual to drive it. They pick what resonates with them. So Ben, you find things on mindset or on, scripting or whatever, you would go, I'm into that. And then you share, you facilitate next week's lesson, and all 4 of us listen to you. And And then we give our opinion because we've read the same thing. And then the following week, it's me. And I write an email out, and we even do the template. Hey, next week, let's talk about mindset and your thinking. And here's a podcast that's you can listen to. So everyone listens to it in the week, and then they come full of insights, facts, and questions, and they just share it. No one's training each other. They just share it, and they learn. They understand the concept of learning from each other and bouncing ideas around, because you'll have seen this in your training. I see groups and someone will say over here, oh, I do this, and they learn of each other all the time. And you think,
some of the best learning, even in the call coaching stuff, I actually like to do call coaching in groups quite regularly, because someone will just learn from being the listener rather than the person who's presenting the call and the person who's doing the coaching. Being a third party listener, quite often they take in the most. But there's so many of these things, right? We're all so different, but there's so many things you can add to the learning process, like what you were talking about there, where somebody learns something and then they teach it to the group. Like, a lot of people actually learn by teaching. That's actually something that is something for me too. I've noticed that in my son. My son is somebody who he'll learn something and then it lands for him when he then goes and tells someone else and teaches someone else about it. But there's other parts to it as well. Like there's a consistency aspect. There's a part where actually sleep helps you to learn and develop some of that muscle memory and firing of the synapses in the brain and all that sort of stuff. And so, sometimes you could say, we're going to do 2 hours once a fortnight on training, when actually for some things, you're better to do 10 minutes a day for a total of 100 minutes. They'll actually learn much faster with the consistency of daily, where they sleep on it after, than the inconsistency of fortnightly.
Yeah.
I think it's such an interesting topic. And I think it's one that if you're a leader and you want to build teams and you want to create effective teams and you want to ultimately do really well and help a lot of customers from a sales and marketing perspective, you kind of have to understand how people learn. Otherwise, how are you going to onboard them? How are you going to train them?
Yeah. I mean, we had that thing about 10 minutes a day. That's interesting, because I think I'm going to throw something on the table here, Ben. We used to do a lot of one-on-one coaching years ago. It happened years ago. Then it got a bit longer. And then I had a group. The first time it actually happened, I had a group in Melbourne that were different. We do private coaching, mainly for conferences, really. And then people can come along to a course. There's a few other people there. And the benefits, they learn from other people. But that first time, I remember in my head, people had to have small bite-sized things. And I agree, as long as they have covered the foundation. So what now happens is, I had this 1 hour coaching every month, 1 hour with each rep of this company, went on for 2 years. And then one day I said to him, Josh, just send them to a 2-day course, will you? Just send the next one to a 2-day course. And he went to a 2-day course, this chap, and he came back, and Josh was like, what the hell have we been doing? I've got to wait till like November to teach them this. Because we just do an hour a month. We do so much backtracking on what we did before, and so much. It's like, my God! So now we've learned everything in 2 days, which means the trainer's got to be really clever and how they land that and embed that. There's a lot of thinking, action, forward planning in that. So you're embedding it and you're practicing with somebody else and you're repeating. And then once you've got the fundamentals, those sort of 10 minutes on an extra thing on the stretch, we call it on the stretch, because then you're refining and practicing and putting it into practice. But at the beginning, I noticed that for them to learn listening, they've got to learn to be questioning. Before them to learn questioning, they've got to learn to be prepared beforehand. For that, they've got to learn, so actually once you've got this foundation done, now we can talk about your stretches, and honing in on certain things. And I think what you do, listen to calls and things like that's really clever, actually. I was listening to some calls I was listening to, actually was in an aged care centre recently, prompted me last week to do some videos. And one of them was about reps pushing the sale away. And that's because we were listening to the coaching call. And they were to do with delaying a sale.
What do you mean?
So this was the scenario, right, Ben? So there's 2 people, and if you just listen to the beginning of the call, you'd think, I can't remember the names. I think one was called Sue, who was inexperienced compared to Jean. So they were an aged care retirement sort of village place. And Jean, all the way through the call, if you had to measure it, not that you'd measure people against each other, because that's not how you do it, you measure yourself against yourself, but she was more polished, she knew the features and benefits. That what that means, they could be present, they're not scrambling, they're not doing all the talking, She was listening, because she knew what she knew the playing field, she knew the marketplace, etc., etc. She was the trusted leader. So the whole way along, if you were to measure her, I would give her, because I'm got a high bar, I'd give her a 7.5 out of 10, but probably Sarah would give her a 9.5 out of 10. And then the other person, Sue, just hadn't been around as long. So she was very empathetic and very polite and listened, but because she didn't know what she was listening for, it wasn't so, but the client wouldn't have known, but I'd probably say I'd give her a 6, right? However, when you got to the end of the call, this is to do with NLP, it's to do with buying strategies, this is to do with, your kinesthetic, for example, that, this is to do with going to that level. At the end of the call, Sue said every time, fantastic, well, shall we get your mother in tomorrow then to look at that room? That's sort of basically how she pulled the future forward, right? Didn't know she was doing it. She just did it naturally, because when she buys, that's what she does. Let's just get on with it, right? Where Jean, up until that point, if you actually clicked up and hung up, she's doing a great job, you'd have realized why she wasn't converting as much at all, like 1/20th of Sue. And it's because at that point, she said, you'll have to go away and think about this, talk to your brother in Perth, it's a big decision for you. So she was pushing the sale away. A lot of reps do that when they start to think about what they're thinking about at the end of what we call our funnel. It's like, what's your wrap up with a client? Okay, I'll get on an email to you then. Okay, are you happy with pauses? Maybe that goes back to asking more questions. Maybe it goes back to some clarity that's needed. Like, how quick are you thinking, I've got all these things to do, I better get on? Or are you actually pulling that sale towards you and just being present? Or are you pushing the sale away?
That's I think that's such a great example, and I'm actually just like wondering to myself now, I wonder how many times I've done similar things like that.
Oh, I do it all the time.
by accident, I wonder how many parts of various sales over the years I've been involved in where I've put a blocker in their own head and pushed it away. Rather than allowing, I think in some of those cases, you're probably not even really giving them the respect that they deserve, that they can make their own decisions their own way. There's a great book called Instant Influence, which I love. And one of the things he talks about in that book is like the last step of this cycle that he teaches is to give people decision autonomy. And so he talks about putting it back onto them and saying, what do you see as the next steps, if any?
That's what we say. We have little wrap-ups, 3 or 4. One is what's the next step? One of them is what's the next step at your end, because that would go back to probably 3 people I didn't mention before. And the other one, if I can throw it in.
Yeah, please do.
It's a cracking one, really. It's, okay, so typically what happens now is.
Yep.
Because that's telling the client you're in safe hands, and I do it every day. I do it all the time. So we start off with, in fact, even on our logos, it's next steps and then typically. So next steps, what's the next steps for you? What happens at your end? And that could end up being another hour conversation or 5 minutes, or it could be great. Well, typically what happens now is we will put together these ideas. I'll give you a call tomorrow for 15 minutes to check we're on the right track. We'll jump on Zoom or something so I can show you something. Then we'll da-da-da-da. And if the word typically, what happens now is it's taking back that control that you mentioned at the very beginning about having a process and being in control of that process. And that typically is like, it's just saying, you know what you're doing. And you're doing it all the time. It's that social evidence. It's like, yeah, I know what I'm doing.
I'll throw an extra one in here too.
Yeah, come on.
I think that works. That works really well, and it works even better if you've also included those steps in an agenda at the beginning of the call, right? You've set the expectation for what's going to happen later earlier, because of the framing effect, right? People will make decisions on what they're going to do later based on information they received earlier, and they don't always remember where they got that information from. But so they get to the end of the call and their expectation is that things are going to go a certain way from here. And then when you tell them, typically from here, what happens is this, they're like, oh, that makes sense because they heard it earlier.
Yes. Yes.
So framing the agenda of what you're going to do later and then presenting it to them again, I think that gives it like almost like a multiplying factor.
It is. We call it forward pacing. If you're discussing things at any point, it's going to happen later. And in a trainer, you do this as well. So you introduce things that are going to happen later. You don't necessarily plan to do that, but you slip it in. So when you get there, you know, you people that might think one thing like, oh no, I always say no worries on the phone. If you slip in early about language, and then by the time we get to that section, they've already unraveled to the point of learning. They've already accepted and surrendered to that concept and let go. We call it letting go of their belief, like, oh no, oh yeah, that's a good point. So they've already let go of that belief. Forward pace with the client as well, by when you've done your research beforehand and proper preparation, you can think, oh, they normally have these 5 or 6 objections, but they're still having a sense. So something's happened with a supplier, or, you know, just preparing properly. So, you know, I'm not going to embarrass so-and-so because he bought the supplier last time, so something's clearly happened, and so-and-so is a high C on the disc, so I'll email that person beforehand the questions. They're not embarrassed in front of me to answer questions because it'll be a high, that's something they get feared, being put on the spot. And then you plan all that, and then you're able to overcome those objections early and unravel them in little bits in an email, a couple of little things in signatures. Can you have your signature? Say, oh, hello, Ben, looking forward to see you 2 weeks' time on Thursday. Your signature now is like, bang, completely aligned with them. Little testimonial on top of that. That's what we, you know, it's real estate on an email. Yes, you've got your calendar invite, but there's your real estate. I mean, right now, I tell you now, I've got 25 signatures. If the next call I get tomorrow is, you know, 90 men that sell, I don't know, plumbing equipment, that would be the image of men selling that are a load of blokes. If it's an aged care centre, the image is like a signature, man. It's all about saying I'm aligned. I'm not making it up. I'm not suggesting anybody goes out and makes it up. It's just like, I'm not going to give a picture of an aged care centre, a load of men that look like they sell pipes. So, you know, and then above that, a little testimonial, just a review that just click that's aligned, not a competitor of theirs, but something that wants the same outcome. So you can do all that preparation beforehand so that you're forward pacing what's going to happen, but also answering objections before they come up and unraveling that, oh, I don't think this company does this, and going, oh, maybe they do.
Yep. There's one of the things I love about sales is ultimately it's just an understanding of what is good human communication. It is not trying to convince, and I've said this a bunch of times, it's not trying to convince someone to buy something that they don't necessarily need. It's just understanding what is good human communication. And I think the thing I love about it the most is that humans are very complicated. Humans are very complicated, and there's 1,000 things you can learn. And it's almost like the more you learn about this world, the more you understand that there's so much to know. And the more I feel like I know nothing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, 100%. Yeah. I want to ask 2 what I think are important questions here. I know we're going to run out of time. We've already gone over, but when you're having a good conversation, you just keep going. So one of them is, I really do want to get a feel from you what your real core beliefs are. You know, like what's the 2 or 3 things that you know, if you could only give 2 or 3 pieces of advice that would be your go-tos, like what really matters to you?
Sales is mindset. It's 99.9% mindset. You've got to be sold on what you're selling. You've got to know that whatever you're thinking is going to determine the end result of the sale. That's number one. And we're
I'll ask you a question about that if that's cool. So we talked a little bit before about like leaders when it comes to mindset. You can use language, the way you talk about things, what you focus on, what you celebrate, that sort of stuff. what are the main ways that, like, if I'm out there and I'm a sales leader, I'm a sales manager, whatever, how do I influence that in my team?
Yeah.
Right. Everyone's being negative and it's not going the right direction. I'm really struggling with my team's mindset. What's the stuff I can do about it?
Back to basics. Take them back to what it means for the client. Take them out to a client. The other day I said to somebody, who's the person who answers the call? And they said, oh, they're based in Queensland. And I said, fantastic. How many clients go through that phone line before they get to you? They said, every client. I said, why are they not on the sales training course? They're the director of first impressions. Up until now, it's been the website, and then they touch your business, and that person's going to sell them or not sell them based on how they answer the phone. So I said, right, let's get them on a Zoom, and straight away, you need to be coaching them. And what you need to do is get them out on site of what you do and take them to some places what you do. And if you can't take them, record it so they can see every single morning before they start work. This client had, in this case, it was plumbing sort of things. They had this issue. We did this, and now look at them. So it's not hard. You're on site anyway. And that's what they do. And you want people to take calls better and be more passionate about what they sell and care more about their client and get really enthusiastic about the solution. Just remind, because most reps are just so bogged down with admin. And they don't understand the importance of CRMs, because they don't understand the importance of, data out's only as good as data in, but they use it as an excuse. Oh, I've got to do admin. No, when you're on the phone to a client, you do it then. When you get the car, you do it then. You don't leave it till 5 o'clock at night. You just quickly wrap up then. Like, your promotion is better off not batching that particular task. I'm big into batching, but not calls, because calls, unless you're really smart, I'm telling you now, if I make 3 calls in a row, I won't remember that first call. In fact, I'll be lucky to call. So if I don't make the notes at the time and then hang up and then clean them up, and I share my screen with people, I have notes I share, we're collaborating. This is not the 1980s selling at, ringing the bell, I've sold a big sale. I'm collaborating, I'm understanding. Here's my notes, I have them up in a Word document. They don't care about spelling, they know that I'm making notes on the fly at the same time. I'm going, okay, next steps we take together. We're collaborating, we're together looking at your issue. Think about, have I got a solution for your issue? So when your reps start to think of that and then go out and see more clients and understand more outcomes, and their eyes are then on outcomes, their clients' eyes are then on outcomes, and no one's looking at the bloody money. I'm selling this thing to you. That's Gansky. But the trouble is most of these reps aren't motivated, and they might have negative mindset because they feel they're selling at here rather than partnering and helping. And I think once a leader has to also embrace that and own that themselves, then really you're just helping more people. Like all this, leaders ever say to me, oh, I wish my team would get more motivated to get on the phone. I just go, we can sort that out. We can sort that out in 20 minutes. There's a whole way to motivate people to do things. But in terms of that, in my experience, number one thing is they're not sold on what they sell. They don't understand it well enough. They don't know the features, benefits. They don't know the alternative to what they have. They've got a negative word in their office about pricing or, the infrastructure or our warranty, Charmaine. They don't understand our business is different. Everybody thinks their business is different. The thing is, our back end doesn't work. I go, do you honestly think that every business functions perfectly? Like you can't go to the competitor and you will not have the problem that you've got. That problem will go, but you'll pick up 7 more problems when you get there. Are you aware that? And sometimes these reps need reframing. I'm like, of course things don't turn up. Of course, everyone's ducks over water. Things happen. Nothing's perfect. And it's perfectly bored and you would leave within about 2 weeks. So for the managers to stop embracing negativity themselves, but going, I'm sorry, but we've got to change. I get all leaders to stop the word change. Not that change is a bad word, but it will land badly with 50% of people. Instead of saying, great, we're going to evolve our systems. We're improving. We're getting more efficient so you can make more of those calls. So then you're taking your team with you rather than, it's going to be change. I know it's another change to give you. I was once at a training, Ben, at the beginning, I'd even sent them a blurb to get themselves in the right mindset. But it taught me after this, I never allow this to happen again, because I always call up the director and have a good conversation beforehand if I haven't spoken to him up to that point. And he started up a 1.5-day conference like this. So tough out there, flipping tough out there. There's not much money around. Look, I've invested in sales training, so we've got to make it work. That was his opening spiel.
Oh my Lord.
And his
talk about a frame up.
His daughter was part of the business, and she just looked at me and went,
Oh
Because I
my
had
Lord.
conversations, and do you know what? The alarm bells were there. The alarm bells were there. He wasn't listening to those conversations. It's really important that they feel invested in and they feel excited about evolution of their skills. And all you've got to say to them is, we're here to make your life easier. I've invested in Charmaine at Smarter Selling. We're going to make your life easier, be more efficient, and going to have more time to the right clients, having the right conversation, be more empowered and more confident. These are the words you feed them. These are the words you feed them. These are the words. So, like, I mean, I had to change on the fly what I was doing. I turned it into this really funny exercise that I'd have to bring out the bag very often. And they were laughing, because laughing is like music and sport a little bit. It's a leveler, right? And laughing means your defense is down, so your amygdala's not fired up and you're back into your alpha, your beta brain waves, but you're at the lower end, so you're calmer and you can take on lessons to get feedback and things like that. You're not in the sort of high stress state. But yes, I think, we've got to, there's lots of things leaders can do, and that's one of them. Get your team to understand the outcome and to really understand what you're thinking about. Because if you think, we're expensive or whatever you're thinking, they're feeling it.
There's two big takeaways from that for me. One is, for you talked about make life easier. This is a thing I talk about with people all the time when we talk about CRM, because we at Trust the Process, we help people implement HubSpot and ActiveCampaign. The biggest problem in most businesses with implementing a CRM system is the sales team, almost always. And now that I'm saying that, I'm obviously negatively framing the people that might buy it.
And directors do that go, unfortunately, you've got to do the paperwork. But I hear directors say that.
Yeah.
You need to train them, Ben, on the directors to make sure when they pull the team on board, I'm sure you do this already, for them to talk about the outcome and how it's going to be efficient. Because I see directors implement things and then they go, oh, I know it's a pain to do. You think, why would you say that to somebody?
Yeah.
Why would you say to them, the thing we've just invested this big chunk of our resources into, because it's going to make us more money, which is what you do for people, makes them more money because it makes them more efficient and effective, and they just don't deliver it properly. They don't deliver the message to their team about how these things are going to help them and make their life easier.
The messaging is super important. There is a flip side to it, which is that just don't make it more complicated for them. Don't create a system where they have to sit there and do a whole bunch of inputs for reports that you're never going to use and no one's ever going to read. Just make it so it actually does help them to make their life easier. And then the communication around it becomes easier because it's the truth that it is making their life easier.
And you get fired up
all the time.
That never happens to you, does it? You get really fired up. You clearly see that all the time.
Oh, so often. It's like, I tell you what, I see it a lot, particularly with some of the more complex CRMs. I've seen it in a lot of businesses, particularly with Salesforce. And I love Salesforce, by the way. Salesforce user for like 6 of the last 10 years. But I've seen it a lot with Salesforce where it's like, what's all the things it could do, right? Let's design it to do all of the things that it possibly could do. Now, who needs to put the information in order for it to do those things? And the answer is almost always the sales team. Fill this bit, 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 and they just end up being data admin. And then you get 6 months down the track and you look at all of those reports, last time opened 3 months ago, and you're like, what are we doing? It's because what do we actually need it to do? What are we actually going to use? And if we're actually going to use it, then do it. And if you're not using it, get rid of the fields, get rid of the reports, stop asking them to do it. And if it actually makes their life easier, then do it. If it makes their life harder, and especially if it makes their life much harder, or they have to spend a lot more time doing data admin, well, you need to redesign the solution and automate more of that. Rather than trying to get direct data from a sales rep, can you pull in proxy data? Can you automate that forms are filling the correct fields and like all of that stuff? And And you know what the great thing is? I've forgotten what the second thing was. So
Oh, I got so passionate. You got very fired up. You got very fired up. I thought you must come across the whole time. I understand. But we looping back, that mindset thing was my first thing. My second thing, looping back to the values, see sales as helping the client.
Yep.
Yeah. Stop trying to sell.
Yep.
At them. I don't mean selling's bad. Love the fact of selling, but stop trying to sell at them.
Yep.
So as a leader, stop saying go and present at or go and talk to more people. That has to go. Go and listen to more people. Go and understand more situations. That language has to be replaced. This is 1980s language. This is 2023 language. Swap them over. And also, sales is no longer always be closing.
Oh, a line from an all-time great sales movie that shows all the things you should never do ever again. Glenn Ross.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Alec Baldwin. A always, B C closing. Great movie. Love that movie.
Do you know what? I'm not even sure I've even watched that movie.
You have to. You have to, because you'll sit there now the whole time and just cringe.
Oh gosh, that's the thing.
Actually, Alec Baldwin and Kevin Spacey's characters are just the cringe-worthy sales leaders. Alec Baldwin is the very aggressive one. He literally pulls a pair of brass balls out of his briefcase, and he shows them to the team, and he's like, "Because I've got brass balls." Like, he's that guy. And Kevin Spacey's the very one, like the just going along with whatever Alec Baldwin says, because Alec Baldwin is the tough, confident one, and he's just like, "Oh, whatever he says, guys."
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's bad, but it's so good because I've been there. Like, I've been in those teams before.
Oh yes, yeah. I actually had a client last week that said, "Always be closing." They said, and the reason they said it is because sometimes as a trainer, you get this on the course. Some people want to train on the course.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And so the trouble is with this particular situation is I didn't agree with what he was saying.
Yeah.
It became a very interesting conversation because you're an hour in, and I've had no rapport with that person before because their directors got them on board, and they were answering everybody else's questions. And I thought, this is really interesting. Well, one, I'm quite happy to hear other answers. I've got no issue about my ways, hopefully a plethora of different ways that might suit, not just one way, but this infrastructure. But, he said, you've got to always be closing. So everything was like that. And I was thinking, I'm going to have to re-steer this conversation. And in a way, I thought I'm going to have to pull out all my communication skills to re-steer it in a way that I don't offend that individual. But nobody else in the room is picking up what they're saying. And I went, oh, well, let's just talk about that for a second. And I just had to keep batting them out. But I thought he might slow down and stop, but he didn't. He did quite a long time. A couple of the other ones were now, but he said, oh, I know. I can't. If I repeat it, it'd be obvious if the person happens to listen in. But they were taking calls in a certain way. And he said, oh, what you're going to do is say this to the customer. And I went, don't say that. Just do not say that, please. That might work with 1 out of 20, but the thing is, it's a high risk thing to say. And high risk just means the other 19 would be turned off. And so, yeah, always be, I don't know, people say always be connecting or always whatever. But basically, just as a leader, again, you mentioned leaders listening to this. Don't think about, and salespeople and consultants and entrepreneurs, just don't, you've got to be commercially minded, but you're not always closing. In a way you are, because in a way everything you do, act and behave is show that you're the expert, not because you're trying to be the expert, not because you're trying to be clever and better than anybody else, but because you're so engrossed, you naturally ask better questions. If you're really engrossed, you naturally ask better questions. You naturally go, can I just sort of, why did that happen before and not this time? Or I'm a bit confused about that. And the moment that happens, they no longer see you as an equal in the game. They see you as that trusted advisor. And now that's when you can handle objections and you can guide them and you can educate them, because they don't see you as an equal or, God forbid, below them. And a lot of reps, and you'll have been there sometime maybe, and so me, like, thank you so much for the meeting. Thank you so much for your time. They're so subservient. Basically, I'm putting you out as a client up there, oh God almighty, as opposed to going, well, you know what? Once I've done my work of myself, I've got my mindset straight, I know what I'm selling, I'm prepared, I'm going with certainty.
Yeah.
I'm going as the
positioning
authority.
is so critical.
I'm going to help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a great book about positioning. I think it was by Al Rees and Jack Trout, called Positioning. Very, very, very good book.
You must just have a
Sorry,
whole lot of positioning.
whenever I get into whenever I get into sales conversations, are just all the books that I've read over the years.
I love it.
Back to me.
Love it.
I couldn't agree with you more. Like, just maybe this is one where what we were talking about earlier in terms of like, is the word sales potentially part of the problem now? No, but I think the idea, the concept of closing to me is kind of dead, right?
Oh, it's gone.
I'm not trying to
Finished.
close, right? Because there is no close. We shouldn't
There's
be
no
trying
close.
to close. We're trying to start a relationship. We're not closing something, we're opening something.
Oh,
right? What we're doing is trying to get them to the door to open the door. We're not trying to close anything.
That's it. I did have a client come up the other day and they did say, my team need help closing. They're very expensive, very expensive. People always say this. They're very expensive. They don't have the training. They just need help closing. And, and I actually was silent for a bit because I just thought, well, if they're really good at everything else, they'll be closing. So he said, are you there? I said, yes. And he said, what is that? I said, well, closing is a consequence of doing all the first things right. Like your team aren't doing the first things right. If they're doing the first things right, the sale comes naturally. There's no separate thing. Now let's learn to close. You've got to get the first things right. There's 8 things at the beginning to get right. You get those things right, you've got a relationship, you've understood them, and all the rest of it that comes naturally in the infrastructure that you both need. But like, it's not a self-contained thing. It's a bit like negotiation. Unless you've done all the rest of it right, then the need to negotiation probably goes down or off the table. But people coming just to negotiation without doing that fundamentals first, just does my brain cell then. Yeah. And all the time we run our senior groups, we've only ever had one company, which was, they sent 2 individual people, only to advanced negotiation. And at the end of day 2, both of them said, oh, we need to come back and do the one before this. because you only negotiate because you haven't asked the right questions, you haven't listened properly, you haven't prepared properly, you haven't overcome the objections. If you did all that, then that need to negotiate, now we're giving you skills to hone in on, but you haven't got, it's like giving you how to ice a cake, but yes, you don't know how to cook a cake. So they're all the things you have to sort of deal with when you're trying to help people understand. It's not their fault. They just, I can understand it. They think, they just need help with this one thing, as though it's a separate, self-contained unit. Yeah.
And it's not how you sell anymore. That is closing is the epitome of the cheesy 80s sales. Someone once said to me, the best way to think about like closing as a concept is you should get to the end of your sales process. And if you had to stand up and leave the room and someone else walked in and said to your customer, what should we do next? They would tell you what to do next and what they want to have the outcome be. The customer should just then be able to say exactly what comes next. If they couldn't do that, well, you're in a position where now you've got to try and close them, right? So they should be able to do it on their own.
You're saying that by the time you leave, the clients should have, you with the client have mapped out the next part of the journey together. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And they should be able to express to a completely separate third party what should happen next.
Got it.
Right? Because and what they want to do next.
A lot of people listen to this will have the situation, as we both do and our clients do, where you're engaging with somebody and they have to sell on your concept and your solution to somebody else. And that's my big thing of the 80s, as well as like get to the decision maker. I always go, did they call you up? They go, yeah, they're the decision maker. Do they call you up? They're the decision maker. They're not the final decision maker, but they're deciding out the 8 places they called who they're going to put forward to the final decision maker. They're going to work out if you're the right company that's the authority, and then they'll probably go at the end, actually, Ben, I'm going to introduce you to blah, 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 and they'll pull you through. But the old school thinking is all those old school things are long gone. And in fact, they haven't been on my mind very much, just that recently I just saw some posts on them, which was why I actually got in contact with you, because it's like people are still thinking old school, like nothing's evolved, like people, the reason it doesn't work now for multiple reasons. But when we both started out, I'm older than you, but I'll just throw that in, pretend I'm the same age, is there there was no website, right? There was no website, there was no LinkedIn. So that salesperson had to be charismatic and the gift of the gab and sense of attention and be able to explain a compelling story. They had to do it. That's not now, because the clients can find that online. So their touch point with us is way, way down the decision-making process for the majority of what we sell, not for everybody. But it means by the time they've touched a human being, they can look at your website, look at previous reviews, look at frequently asked questions. Now they've got the pain point. Now you might have teams that are BD, business development people that are acquiring business. That's different. But for most of us, these people are frankly order takers, unless they can hold compelling conversations and listen and ask better. They're just basically reacting to what's coming in. And so that need to evolve that type of conversation and, not have to be so, always be closing and all those old things of, they're just gone, because the client's smarter, because that's the wrong word. The clients have got more information. They've got more education. They can get their fingers on more education. So the conversation needs to be completely client-centric in my mind, and no assumption from you. Yes, you've got to be a framework and everything else, but very different types of conversations. So we've got to let those old things go.
Couldn't agree more. Charmaine, we're going to have to wrap this up, because I think you might have to come back, because I think we could probably just actually keep going almost forever. But before you go, let the listeners know, where can they find you and what might they reach out about?
Where they may find me is on smarterselling.com.au. That's been smarter selling. And what they may be experiencing is either very experienced leaders and professional salespeople that want to evolve even further and maintain the edge, right through to people that have just need more assistance. So we would usually do a whole company, and very rarely do we do one or two salespeople in a team, unless their team is 1 or 2 salespeople. But if there are 8 salespeople, it would be rare to send just 2, because that's not the right message, that only 2 people need training. So we could all evolve. So they would then have a conversation with me, and all they care about is what's your business and what do you sell and who do you sell to and what's the problems, and then would work out what's the best suit for you. And it could be that they have their own completely tailored, customized one, or it could be, get your team amongst a few other people that might only be 18, or there's those sort of numbers, and then you're amongst other people, so they get to hear about other people's opinion and take away the hierarchy in their company, where John always gets the squeaky wheel, and they then, when they're amongst other people, they all up their game and act more professional. It's an event, there's delicious organic food, and there's not PowerPoint inside, there's 3 breakout rooms, there's loads of daylight, and they wear a badge, they get to meet people, they have great breakfast. It's a huge product table with loads of free things on it. It's like it feels good. You feel invested in by your company. We talk about that. Isn't it great your company have sent you here? We have people that pay for themselves all the time. So we often there ought to be at least 6 that go, I paid for myself. And everybody's like, oh my God, my company believes in me. And they take it really seriously, because we take it seriously. We take work seriously. So that's who would come to us and what for. We also, that's leaders and their teams. And that will often include their customer service teams as well. So there's a whole range, suite of, it's called a development pathway. People often start and they develop their way through, but there's some that you could just jump to. Mentoring, you just jump to, all different things. And the leader ones the same, the leaders of their own lanes. So situational leadership, extended this for leaders. Guy from TEDx Melbourne, John Yeo, does our high level presenting for advanced communication. And I do smarter leaders to get more business in. So that's where you can find us.
Fantastic. If you are out there and you are a business owner, a sales leader, anybody that has revenue generating teams, and you are not currently teaching and training and developing those people, I suggest you reach out to Charmaine ASAP. And even if you are and you need somebody with a bit of a, with a lot more experience and capability and expertise in teaching those people, I suggest you reach out. But it has been an absolute pleasure. I hope we get to have you back at some point. This has been a great conversation, lots of fun for me. So thanks for joining us.
Well, I've learnt loads, Ben. I've got about 9 different books now I've got to read on my reading list. So
I have a habit of doing that.
Thanks for having me on board. Thanks for having me here.
Anytime.